We have a presentation and discussion on the Mitch Park Northwest Sports Fields Master Plan to include possible direction from City Council. Go ahead. We'll go ahead and do the presentation and have our discussion.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. In March, we were given the directive to look into doing a master plan for this corner of Santa Fe, this corner of Mitch Park along Santa Fe, to look at putting in some sports fields for some of our growing programs. And so we hired Planning Design Group to do that. We walked through a process, and we have a couple concepts in front of you and some pricing estimates. Tonight, Jeff Evans from Planning Design Group came from Tulsa, and he's going to walk through these concepts and mention a couple other things regarding this. So I'll turn it over to him. So.
Welcome, sir.
Thank you. Again, as Craig said, I'm Jeff Evans with Planning Design Group, or PDG, out of Tulsa. Our company is headquartered in Tulsa, but we do state work all over the state. We specialize in parks and recreation and sports complexes for multiple municipalities across the state. Currently, we're working with about 15 municipalities, anywhere from $150,000 playground to a $22 million soccer complex. So we do a little bit of everything. We've been in business for about 40 years. We do landscape architecture, community planning, urban planning, and we have a sister company that does golf course design. So we have an extensive background in the state of Oklahoma. This site is roughly 30 acres. You can see there's one concept up on the board now. I know most of you have already seen this, but just to run through a few items. Some of the existing elements that are on the site, there's an electrical substation, storage area for the city of Edmond, a water well site. To the southeast is the YMCA. There is a geothermal field on the site that services the YMCA. The site is bordered by Santa Fe on the west and Kite Fest Lane on the south. There is a couple easements that run through the site. If you look on the top right-hand side, you see a line coming. All right, thank you. There is a line coming through here. There's two 16-inch petroleum lines that run through there with an easement. So you'll see some of the design is based around that. There is a water line that comes off the water well and comes down and connects to a line on Santa Fe. And then also there's an OG&E easement on the north side and on the west side of the site where the power lines are. Design criteria was to design 3 to 4 synthetic turf fields and then have open space or flex play areas that can be utilized for a variety of sports, but the main focus was on lacrosse, soccer, football, flag football, and then the flex spaces that go with this. Design was also to include concession and restroom buildings, possible referee spaces, and maintenance and storage areas. Parking to accommodate these items, sports field lighting, a trail connection from the existing trail, and that's the white line that goes around there, from the northeast corner of the site to the southwest where there's existing trails now. We have to account for detention on the site and analyze all vehicular and pedestrian circulation to make sure we take care of that for ADA accessibility and to ensure that we have safe routes around the site. Last was to analyze some of the site utilities, which through that process we did determine that most of the utilities are either on site or adjacent to the site. So as you're seeing here, this is concept number 1. This is a 4-field design. It is a little scrunched, but as you can see, you got your 4 main field areas. These are proposed to be synthetic turf fields. This area plus the area of the concession stand, restroom, and referee area, and anything that's within the fenced area, this would all be a locked fence area, so it could be secured. This takes up roughly about 12 acres of the 30 acres that are on the site. This would include shaded seating areas for players and spectators. And then on top of that, we would have the main parking area that's here off of Santa Fe and has a connection to Kite Fest Lane. And this area would take up about another 3.5 acres of parking. And then we have the natural grass flex play area over here. Through research, we've seen that you can put things on top of the geothermal field. We just can't modify the grade too much, but to get some flex play space, it will allow for that use on top of there. That area will take up another roughly 8 acres of the site, as you can see there. So that's all of your kind of sports and recreation area. You will have the trail that goes around the site. entryways that are locked off and gates and entry features to designate the space. On the north side here, behind the water well, is a maintenance storage area, so you would have that on site to store goals or equipment or even maintenance items that you wanted to keep in this site. Detention right now, we're showing along the southwest side of the site. We have talked with stormwater. We might have to account for additional stormwater on site, but if we move into CDs or whatever on this project, we would obviously have a civil engineer on our team to work through those items and know the exact size, depth, and requirements for that, and work with your city people to get that taken care of. And then last, we have a parking lot that's down here on the southeast side that's could be an optional parking lot with about 150 spaces. The main one has about 385 spaces in it, and this more than accounts for typical lead play and some overlap, but without creating a whole parking lot on the whole site, you're never going to account for every piece of parking that you can possibly want on the site. But this accounts for more than the standard practice that we go by to account for parking for a sports complex. That is concept A, and then concept B, very similar in all the elements. The only difference on this one is we downsized and went to a 3-field layout, a little bit larger flex play area. So this one, we have about 8 acres go into the lockable area, which would include this space here. And then the parking lot takes up about the same space. We show it as an optional space on this one, but a parking lot down here on this end takes up roughly the same, about 150 spaces. And then this one, the flex play area will go up to about 8 acres, where on the other one, it's about the same because the other one was about 9 acres. So this one just kind of utilizes the site a little bit different. The maintenance area is in this portion of the site right there. And then obviously, you've seen the cost estimates associated with these that are on the next couple of slides. They're in the same ballpark. One's about $1 million more just based on the size and the additional synthetic turf field that has the majority of the cost here. Parking lots and sports lighting and the synthetic turf are your big dollar amounts. That concludes what I have. Do y'all have any questions?
How do you feel about traffic flow on it?
That's part of the reason we put out some of the exits to the parking lot
Yeah.
onto Kite Fest and some out onto Santa Fe, so you have options to get in and out, and it gives you the ability to go through the park
Right.
and out to the south also.
It's several.
Yeah, so trying to account for several exit strategies to get people in and out of the site.
Right.
Obviously, this is a growing area of Edmond. It has
Yeah.
been for years, and multiple developments around this site too that are possibilities.
Can we talk about, so between the 3-field option or 4-field option, what economies of scale come with it either way? So if you do 3 fields, you've got utility extensions that are
Really,
coming
the
no matter
biggest thing
what.
on that is you're gonna add the sports lighting to the site, which is about $250,000 per field.
Right.
When you do the fields side by side, you have shared lighting. So as that goes into the 3 versus 4, you can utilize the shared lighting on that one field. You're gonna have the cost of the turf, obviously, and the drainage system of the turf fields that go into that. But really, other than that, that's about it. I mean, we're not gonna have drastic cost of upsizing the restroom or bringing in different utilities to account for that. Those are kind of your 2 big major factors.
Can you discuss the flex space on the first option? Let's look at it. Is there room? Hold on. When you think of that flex space, what's your vision for the use of that?
The vision
is
is-
that practice fields, or is that?
So when we met with various user groups throughout the community before we did this master plan with the Parks Department, with Craig and other staff. And so we met with the Flag Football League, Friday Night Lights. We met with the lacrosse group. We met with some different other I-9 sports, YMCA. And so different things that they would propose to use on these are youth soccer, youth flag football. They might have practice areas for lacrosse or any of those other sports. So you would be able to use it for whatever you want. And with it being natural grass, it's easier to remark and utilize the fields for various types of sports and sizes of fields
That don't need lights.
that don't need lights. You do most of that on a Saturday. It's going to be more of your youth kids that
Yep.
you're not going to need the game fields for.
So would you also, I mean, that flex space could also just be used for open space, like to the right there, just for the public to enjoy the park.
100%.
too, right? I mean, it's not gonna be limited to only sports.
There's going to be no fencing around that area, so I guess if it's programmed and reserved for sports practices or whatever, obviously you would have restrictions then, but if it's, nobody's using it, I'm assuming it can be used for whatever.
So what's, I mean, the total, how many acres is the whole piece?
The
And,
total site is about 30 acres.
and then under option 1, there's 8 acres of open space and 9 acres in option B, or,
There's about 8 acres, on this 4-field version, there's 12 acres of lockable area, and then on the other one, there's about 9 acres.
so the free space is 12 acres?
The free space on this one is 8 acres.
Okay.
Sorry,
I'm
12,
trying to figure out the comparison of the free space in the 2 options.
they're roughly the same. Both of them are,
He says roughly the same.
one is 8 acres and one is 9 acres. So that's 8 acres there roughly, and then on the other one, it's 9 acres.
Okay,
It's just in a different configuration, and you take out some of the space that goes further to the north. And with the parking lot moving further to the east on this one, to have that entry area, it takes away some of the space there too.
Were you asked to do any analysis of revenue on the fields?
Not on this, because in the end, that will be based on how it's programmed and everything else. So depending on what sports group uses it the most, if it's lacrosse, if it's flag football, or who.
So Craig, are you gonna get up in a minute, or are we gonna?
I can't anytime.
Can I make,
Does anybody need you? I don't want.
Well,
I was gonna make one more suggestion.
And I had a comment,
If-
too.
On the 4-field, if you'd switch to the 4-field one, and just because I'm in this world right now of playing at complexes right now with our kids, where it opens up to the open field from the complex where the fencing is at,
Yes,
kind of the
sir.
common area in the middle, what you'd usually do is have a gate or gates there where you can warm up while the other games are happening, warm up there, and usually a volunteer mans the gate or
100%,
something.
yes.
And be able to have flow instead of having to go all the way around.
100%.
Okay.
And that one might even have a gate on the southeast side or on the south side that
Yeah.
we might extend the sidewalk and have access for
Yeah.
overflow parking too.
Thank you.
And there might be tournaments where you're running some
Both.
games on the grass fields and some on the synthetic turf.
Right.
So,
Yeah, thank you.
So my question was this, I appreciate the comparison of what you're calling the flex space, because just to let you know, that's very important to me, because this total 30 acres was just nothing but open, passive land, and now we're gonna try to get the best benefit out of that. So you say you talked to a lot of interest groups that have come to the city right now, but have you talked to some of the other interest groups that are already using this field? Because there is I want a full conversation going on about, we're gonna take, if we looking at taking 30 acres of open land to down to 8 or 9.
Yes, there's no other sporting events that take place. It used to be rugby years ago. They've kind of gone by the wayside. Other sports partners use this from time to time for practices. I know the YMCA has used it in the past for games, but they're playing their games on the baseball, softball fields. Obviously, we've had discussions with the YMCA. Liberty Fest, we've had discussions with them about using this space still for Kite Fest, for their event. And obviously, we haven't sent anything out to the public besides the different user groups that we've met with. That would be the only other group that uses this, so.
So you could have, if this were to move as far as the public and the neighbors in that area, you could have like a community connections meeting,
Sure.
right? If it
Be
were
happy
to
to.
move forward, just
Yeah.
like any other development project
Yes.
that would be in the area.
Right.
Craig, I do know that there's teams, soccer teams and rec teams that use the field right now for practicing. Would that still be allowed on the?
Yes,
on the flex space?
soccer's asked us if there's a possibility they could use this in the wintertime, and obviously lacrosse, football, those things are fall and spring, so the wintertime would probably be a good time for them to be able to use that.
What about the flex space, just for open practice?
Yeah, it just depend on programming, who needs to play games there or practices. As
Yeah.
Jeff was mentioned, we'll just have to figure out a schedule for that. We don't want to book it up the whole time. We want to have time for people just to walk up and play. Or maybe a team just wants to show up there to practice, so we'll have to figure out a schedule for that, so.
So my question was on financing. I'm assuming that you've looked or considered what it would cost for Friday Night Lights and others to utilize the fields.
We haven't got down to the exact dollar or have had discussions with them about what they are willing to pay. We are planning on doing some research of what other similar facilities are in the region. There's not many in Oklahoma. Broken Arrow does. But we'd look north and south, Kansas, Texas, to see what something like this could rent for, especially if a different group that's not one of our sports partners comes in and wants to rent this facility, then we're gonna charge them the going rate for that, to use that, and especially if they're using lights, if they need maintenance and that type of stuff, so.
I would encourage you to do that. It's a big obligation.
Right.
I'm really excited that we're doing it.
We need to look at our operations and maintenance and
Yeah.
determine those costs as well for that.
When
so.
will that take place?
I think it just depends on the directive that we're given tonight, or
Okay.
if there's further discussion, we'll go into more of that research to get some better ideas for prices and costs, so.
Okay.
And I'll add just another question. When you calculated the parking, how's that guesstimated? Because, I mean, I know it's just a draft, and on the 3-1, the parking is like flex parking or something like that, but.
So typically, when we calculate parking, we estimate how many players are going to be on each team, how many players are going to be on the field with coaches and stuff like that. And then we use a factor of 2 cars per player or coach that are going to be on the field. And that's kind of a pretty standard deal, because you might have people that have 4, you might have people that only have 1, you might have one that rode with somebody. So what we found over the years is if we use a factor of 2, it usually balances out correctly. That's increased over the years because, as you know, grandmothers, grandfathers, aunts, uncles, cousins, whatever, like to show up to games now in support of Little League. And so I have kids myself that have been going through this, so I analyze that too when I'm visiting these spaces. And you're never going to be able to account for enough parking for big tournaments and the overlap and who sticks around between games and that type of stuff. But this gives a good number of spaces that will account for any league play and some overlap.
You know, you do have, I mean, I know this is a little bit of a stretch, but you do have the overflow parking for the baseball fields and YMCA, and it wouldn't be crazy to shuttle, if it was a bigger tournament or something, to shuttle people back and forth.
I was also thinking about your question there about the flow, because we have 2 exits onto Santa Fe, but then the next exit, it's not through Maryland Williams all the way over to Covell, which you have to traverse through the rest of the park. And I don't know, maybe some additional engineering or thought processes might need to happen.
And that can be included, like at the city of Norman, we just recently redid their soccer complex where they took baseball fields out and added soccer. And with that, the city required us to include in our contract when we went into formal design to do a traffic engineering study of the site and let their traffic department make recommendations on what needs to be done based on this report. And what we had to do was make some of the entrances and exits right in, right out only. We had to do another tie-in somewhere else to allow that. I think, and we took into some of that into consideration when designing this and looking at going out the backside of the park, because that was one thing that they made us do, was even though it was a long distance away, they made us add a road in the park to go to a different site where they wanted to add a traffic signal. So it allowed that flow to go to those different areas and take people opposite directions. So like even the exit onto Santa Fe there could be a right in, right out only, so you don't back up traffic trying to turn left there and make anybody that wants to turn left come down to Kite Fest Lane and be able to turn left at the intersection.
I do think a lot of people would go to Covell.
I do too. Also, keep in mind, that we're getting ready to do a master study of the entire park.
Yeah.
This is,
Flow.
and just for people here, we had run into a problem with not enough fields. It may be, during certain times of the year, it may be our largest complaint or voice from citizens. And that's what prompted this, because we had a master plan coming up to do this park, and this was gonna be discussed then. But we, as a council, asked them to move up this discussion on fields before the master plan. So I think it's just valuable to know that we're doing this up front, and then they'll take the master plan, we'll just take this into account when they do it. Is that described appropriately?
Yes, it leapfrogged.
Yeah, it leapfrogged.
It leapfrogged.
And I would,
Importance.
I guess if you rearrange something else, but this master plan wise, this really is about where this can go. If it
Right.
were to,
Yes.
there's not many other
And
options.
we've shown some other options. You can add some more fields if you wanted more formal fields versus flex space, but it seems like the flex space is kind of a priority on this site based on
Yeah.
what it is now, and so
Yeah,
this lends itself, I mean, even if you went down to 2 fields, you have options here. These just show you the various options of how you can take the puzzle pieces, move them around, add something to it, do a little bit up front, and if you want to add more formal to it later, you can. So there's options that we can add additional fields even to the 3 field option too. 4 gets a little bit tight just based on some of the easements and stuff like that we can't build on.
I'll throw in my 2 cents for the 4 fields at Broken Arrow, that was
Nice
mentioned,
park.
and they've got 2 turf and 2 grass, but the whole complex, when it's used, all 4 fields are used.
My kids
And-
grew up playing there, and
Yeah.
they're actually set to turf the other
Yeah.
2 fields now. They passed it in their
It's
most
usually the
recent bond
same.
issue.
Yeah,
Yeah, we will never be sorry that we have these fields.
or at least 4 of them.
Yeah, 4 of them.
Most of the people we see that do not turf their fields, it's just because they don't have the upfront money to do it. I mean, in all reality, they all want it. But at, $700,000 to $1 million a field, it's a big hit.
Then there's also the life cycle cost with it, whenever that determination's made that they have to be replaced.
And cost goes drastically down at that point because you already have your subbase, you have your drainage, you have all that stuff. So it's not that same $700 to $1 million when you get to that point. And it just depends on if you go with 4 versus 3, the economy of scale when the contractor puts it in. We've seen some go as low as $650 a square foot, and we've seen them as high as $8 or $850, which is kind of, we don't want to have a sticker shock later, so we use that higher number when we're budgeting just because we don't know when this will be built or who's going to be building it or anything like that. So we have to make sure we cover ourselves on that. So the numbers could come down, they could go up. I mean, gas prices are coming down, so shipping goes down, everything goes down.
Yes, sir.
Well, I would be anxious to see the public's response to paying for the fields, for the leagues our kids pay a fee to play in these leagues, and I'm really anxious to see what their appetite is to pay a little bit more to have a better fields. And I don't know how we get that feedback, but that's what I think we need.
I was gonna say,
Oh, I would add one thing into that, is one player in this is the YMCA. That we know they're, just like every other sport, private sport or other organization, they're growing. So are the YMCA leagues, and I think that's a wonderful thing. But they've been notified of a couple of things on their land, that they do youth soccer over by Hobby Lobby, behind Hobby Lobby, and they don't know what the future holds for their flat fields. And so when we're talking about the set prices to pay for that, I just want to keep in mind, we do have a partner with the YMCA that we're a community partner with at the same time, and it may not be the same thing with them, but that discussion could come when it comes.
All right.
yes, sir.
Thanks, Mayor. Both Councilmember Chapman and Moore kind of addressed my concerns. I guess the more direct question is, typically my understanding is these last about 8 to 10 years, and then you have to renew them. Is that the actual?
The turf fields are about 10 to 12 years, and then you have to replace the turf itself.
What's a typical cost to replace? I know you're quoting per square footage, I don't know what that means.
It's probably, I would say 60% of the original cost. I mean, so call it in the neighborhood of 500,000 instead of 700,000. I mean, there is a cost savings to it, but it's still expensive.
Sure. So I think that's, as we find out more information, we need to find out what our partners, because it's not playing on grass fields, it's playing on a premium turf field, and you have to figure in life cycle, and it might not be $10 to rent for an hour, it might be significantly more because you're paying for lights and paying for turf maintenance, because you do have to maintain the fields.
Yes.
You still, I don't know if it's the crumb rubber type of,
There's so many different types of
Yeah.
infills now that you don't have to use the rubber on all your fields. They honestly, it's gonna sound weird, they make a wood filament type infill. But typically the sports fields are the rubber, but they do have some other options now. Then you have the padding and everything for the concussion rated fields and different things like that. So, yeah, you put it in place. I don't want to quote a movie, but I will. If you build it, they'll come, I promise. In Oklahoma, we don't have many turf fields. They're at the high schools. They're at things like that. And designing these across the state, if you put one in place, it's going to be the most used thing that you have in the city.
so part of the question, the council, when we come back with the additional detail that Craig's gonna find about, what our league's willing to contribute or participate with. Then the question about the YMCA, it's a question is, are these premium fields, we're going after sports tourism type of activity, or are you willing to provide a time for, call it a community partner, who may not be able to get the turf rates that we typically look for? So we may come back with call it cafeteria of options to say, is this almost to the concept of indoor sports facility is, hey, we're gonna go after with Jennifer, I don't know if she's still here, visit Edmond about sport tourism. What is that? Those are mainly weekend activities, and then the practices are during the week. Or are you willing to open this up for general use? Those are just different financial models we have to consider, because you may, if you open up for general community use, you may be taking more of a view that we're not going for full cost recovery. We're willing to work with our partners. So just be aware of that. We'll come back with the additional information if we go through the next level.
I can tell you, there's a whole bunch of people in Edmond that go to Broken Arrow every weekend to play on those turf fields and stay in Airbnbs and hotels and eat at the restaurants. I wouldn't mind getting a little of that.
I do have a question for you. You
Yes, ma'am.
mentioned concussion rate. So are you saying this is safer to play on?
They can put factors in place that will make it a softer field than hitting a dirt ground or a natural grass field.
That's encouraging.
Very good.
I can't say that it's concussion-proof, but I'm gonna tell you
Well,
that it's
yeah.
rated better for the head
Better
impact.
than hitting a hard solid
Yes.
surface.
Well, what it is, there's options out there, and all of it, every option has an economic impact associated with it.
Most of what we just told you should include that type of option to put at least some type of padding underneath it, whether it's the highest rated or the lowest rated, it will have some type of padding underneath it.
So we have a lot, additional information is going to come into us. There's a lot of people in this audience. We looked at our agenda, and there's nothing on the agenda that would warrant this many people being in here. So evidently, some of y'all must be in here for this subject. My Kreskin hats is on right now. So I would like to, it doesn't say anything about public discussion or any comment or anything like that, but I would like to open it up to the audience if there's, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
For right now. We might call you back up later.
All right.
If anyone in the public had any comments that, from what they've seen or heard so far about that. And the thing is just to come up, introduce yourself, who you are. If you're associated with any of these activities, let us know that. And just give us your, as briefly as possible, your comments. Because we're still in the infancy. No, we're beyond infancy now. We're moving forward with this, but we do want the feedback from the citizens also for that. I'll do it. I'm going to go on body movement. No, you, sir. You in the blue. You standing up. You were first.
Yeah, I'm Sean Brady. I'm one of the neighbors that this will impact. But I live on the west side of Santa Fe, right in the middle of the page, all the way to the far left with that road right there. So I'm right on that corner. My concern, I guess what I would like to know is I like all this. I mean, it looks great. I think it'd be wonderful for the city of Edmond. But how's it going to affect the west side of Santa Fe? Are we going to be widening streets? I heard rumors that I was going to lose a big chunk of my property to accommodate for the new traffic flow and things. So I wanted to voice my concerns in reference to that. But I love the idea, don't get me wrong. I've lived there when this was just a wheat field, and I used to be able to go out with a cup of coffee and sit out there and watch the geese come in and land and stuff. So, I mean, I've seen the whole park develop from nothing to this. So, and this is a wonderful addition. I think this would be great. But I also not real crazy about losing a chunk of my land if you're going to have to widen Santa Fe and take a large chunk, because my whole property is on the Santa Fe all the way up and down. So I run from that corner that you just showed all the way up to that white parking lot there. Yeah, that's my whole property there. And I just heard rumors about a big roundabout and different things that might go in there. So I don't know, that's why I'm here, is that I was just concerned on how much property I may lose and how would I be compensated for this? How does something like that affect me?
So, thank you for your concerns. Hopefully, we have a scribe from our point that we can take these down. So one of the things that we're going to have to control here is the management of information that's going out. I mean, that's the first I've ever heard of a roundabout.
Community connections.
That's why I heard rumors.
Yeah,
That's why I hear that.
so what you're telling us is that we're going to have to increase the communication level, output of information, so that, and that was one of the reasons why I asked the question about the non-users, and my question, because I know this thing affects other people. So we just have to work on that, and we could possibly have that as part of our responses back as as Mr. Dishman gets additional information from the park department.
Okay.
Okay?
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Let's go the next row back. Ma'am, you there? Against the wall underneath the wagon. Yes, you. Please tell us who you are. Are you associated with any group or anything like that, ma'am?
Thank you. Well, good evening. I'm Sam Anderson, and I am your chairperson for your Parks and Recreation Board. So I apologize that I've not been here to introduce myself before. I've served on the board just over 2 years, and as chair just for about a year. So what I wanted to bring to the conversation tonight is that, first of all, I cannot in any way represent the board in an official capacity and speak for them. I can speak about the action that was taken when this was presented to us at our meeting last Thursday. We tabled it for next month because we felt like there were a multitude of questions that we had that just couldn't be answered yet. That there also perhaps had not been, I know that Mr. Moore referenced a connections meeting to start a dialogue with the community, and that's an excellent point. And sometimes I think that perhaps the communication needs to begin before a tremendous amount of money is spent on putting together a master plan projection that would utilize the last open field. One of the last, I believe it is the last open field in our city limits. And so I understand the need for supporting our youth, especially ones that could earn them a scholarship. Lacrosse is an up-and-coming sport, just like soccer and volleyball. And these kids, they develop and they grow in the sport, and they can apply to school, and it becomes an avenue to better their careers. But that being said, there is some grace about an open field, multiple use space. I personally can speak just from what I saw from the presentation the other night. I have a great concern. I would like to emphasize as much open space to remain as possible. I would not want to see this entire project fill all of the remaining open space. There are a multitude of activities that maybe aren't on the same scale as perhaps like what you're hoping for, Mr. Chapman, with bringing in sports dollars for tournaments. And I am all for developing the rest of our complexes, that all the ones, the projects that we've already started that we would like to see to fruition. And that brings in tremendous amount of dollars, tax dollars to our city, and that's fantastic. And it supports our youth. But I think we have to go slowly and open up a dialogue sooner than later with the citizens, with students, with parents, and with the local community that surrounds Mitch Park for the impact that this would have. There is a great bonus to having a complex like this. I know, Mr. Chapman, you mentioned that you think we'll never regret having these fields, and I think that there's a certain point to be made that that is a solid truth, but also there's a solid truth in losing the last open field unless we
Can I
acquire
ask you something
more.
about those fields? Have you been to those fields lately? The open field out there, have you been there lately?
Yes, I drive past it almost every day.
I would say it's probably, I've never really seen anybody out there, and I'm up there a lot, because it's
Okay.
really, really hard. There's not much grass on it. It's, in my estimation, almost unusable. Maybe to go fly kites, but there's not much you can do on that land right now.
Okay. My personal experience is I have witnessed multiple things, people walking dogs. I've witnessed the kite flying. I know that there's a gentleman here, I think, who came to our meeting who's going to speak to you about Liberty Fest and the use of it. I know that there's been the log climbing, the pole climbing competitions. I didn't come prepared with a list of everything I've observed out there. But coming and going through the park, I have observed a great deal of activity. But anyway, I'll bring my comments to a close, and I apologize for taking so much of your time. I would just say that that your board is here to support you. Mm-hmm. We were appointed, all the members of the Parks and Recreation Board were appointed by city councilmen, mayors, current or former. And nobody on the board needs that position to fulfill something on the resume. Our board is made up of all professionals from all walks of the city here, and they agreed to uphold the charter that's created by the city of Edmond to protect green spaces. And so we take that seriously, and so that's why we send you recommendations and just hope that we know for a fact that we can't tell you what to do, but we can make our strong recommendation of which you've entrusted us to look at and just have oversight. So I appreciate your time, and thank you all for your hard work. I know that you have a very heavy yoke as leaders in our community, so thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, sir, with the American flag T-shirt.
That's a Liberty Fest
I know that.
2021, and you've got one just like it, too.
I think I have 11 of them.
Terry Officer. I am currently the president of Liberty Fest, and I've been the chairperson of Kite Fest for the last 32 years. And so, and that field is a lot more than just a piece of hard ground with hardly any grass on it. The men keep that well mowed and taken care of. I have been personally around a lot of Edmond looking for, because there's been occasions in the past when we were possibly going to lose the field as far as our Kite Fest field for the Liberty Fest Kite Fest. And I have yet to find another field that would serve the purpose, that's large enough to serve the purpose for a kite festival other than this field. This is the last large field without power lines directly affecting the field or the flying area. Mostly we fly in south winds or north winds here in Oklahoma. There are power lines and whatever on the west side of the field and on the north side of the field that rarely, if ever, over the last 20 or 25 years have affected the use of the field for a kite festival. So I'm not just speaking for Kite Fest. I sat down today, and I will not go over, but I made a list of the different sports, if you want to call them that, everything from horseshoes to 3-year-olds practicing soccer on the field. I've seen the rugby team a time or two in the last few years. It's been a while. And it may be that I just don't remember all that I've seen out there. But the different, not just the kite flying that we do or whatever, the soccer practice, the football, baseball, softball, all of that's on that field. I even find golf balls. So I know there are people coming out there probably practicing, I don't know the terminology, probably driving and losing golf balls out there on the field. We use them to make stakes to hold our kites. We drill holes in the golf ball, put a metal pin through it, and make stakes to hold our kites. So we watch for golf balls. Just any number of field, I haven't even taken the time to count all of the different things that happen on that field. And as was just expressed, I hate to see the last large field, open field in Edmond go to another decorated field. When I witnessed, real quickly, I witnessed Saturday another tournament of some sort going on the northwest corner next to Cheyenne Middle School, between Cheyenne and Kelly, on the north side of Covell. It could have been a lacrosse tournament going on right then. I have understood that land is optional right now as far as purchase, and a lacrosse field could be established, a forecourt or whatever the terminology is for it, could be established on that field if the Edmond schools are getting ready to sell that land, as I have heard anyway. I can't think of anything further that I want to add other than I don't know of anyone in authority that got to speak to the Parks Department about this, what's taking place. And I heard about it last Wednesday, inadvertently, not a direct communication. And so if Liberty Fest was notified about this to have their input into what was going on, I wasn't informed of that.
Okay.
As a point of order.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you for your service on Liberty Fest.
Thank you, and you're welcome.
Gentleman right here, yes, sir, with the goatee. Give us your name. Are you associated with any group or just concerned
Thank
citizen?
you for this opportunity. I came here tonight, I reviewed the agenda. I didn't know about this. I'm Walt Strong. I'm a Edmond returnee, okay? I've lived in Norman for 20 years, and I was heavily involved in some of their transportation studies. So the gentleman that gave this presentation said, you might think about a transportation study. I wouldn't think about it. I just put it on the list of mandatory to do. If you look at this parking lot and you start thinking about the number of activities that could come and go, people coming and going in and out those limited number of spots, you're gonna have a mess. So I'd really encourage you to do a traffic study and figure out how you're gonna deal with traffic flow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay, I think we have one last gentleman over here with the gray shirt on.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. My name is David Fleet, and I have the privilege of being here again. I'm one of the commissioners for Friday Night Lights that have met with Park and Rec and in regards to this project. And let me first say that I appreciate the progressiveness that is being considered here. And really, I'm representing around 1,000 Edmond families. We currently have a program. Our Youth Flag Football League goes from kindergarten through 6th grade, as we've mentioned before. And right now, this particular season, which kicks off August 26th, we've had to really scramble of where we're going to play. We're actually having to use, because of the demand, we're having to use one private facility and score OKC. And we're also fortunate enough that Edmond Soccer Club has allowed us to use 4 of their soccer fields and put F&L fields on there. So my recommendation and appreciation for this would be the 4 football fields, as you mentioned, although I am very much for retaining some of the common area. If you think about the 30 acres and what this represents, it might be 35% of the 30 acres, which leaves about 65 or 70% for other use. But you've got 1,000 families that want to play. We've actually had to turn kids away this season because we simply did not have facilities to play at. As a reminder, we play on Friday nights, we play under the lights. And to answer your question, Councilman Chapman, we would pay more than what we're paying now because these particular fields will far exceed where we're playing now. We're playing on hard fields. We're playing on fields that aren't quite as safe as what is being proposed here. And just one last thing real quick is that there was an article just a few weeks ago from the AP, from the National Football League, that is recommending and proposing that flag football be in the 28 Olympics. It's the fastest growing youth sport that there is. And again, you've got 1,000 families here in Edmond alone, some of which, unfortunately, are going to go down to Moore and play in Moore because we don't have any facilities here. Some of which are going to Choctaw to play. We're recommending the 4 fields because that would give us 12 F&L fields, plenty of parking that was mentioned. I understand and respect the concerns about the traffic, but just know that we would be a great partner in any type of maintenance or trash pickup or anything like that, as we have been for the last 4 years here. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so there's been a lot of additional comment, a lot of additional information that needs to be generated, and a lot of additional information needs to be presented. So I like the progress. I love the communication. And you know what? This is a great problem for us to have. A lot of communities don't have this, where we don't have growing activities and what to do and all that. So we just have to have some more communication, and Mr. Dishman, we're going to put you on the hook to generate that for us.
Did we give you all what you needed to know? Okay.
Well,
Andy, did we give you everything you needed to know? I feel like we didn't.
I was getting ready to ask that same question.
Mayor and
Before we
Council, Andy
leave.
Conyers, Assistant City Manager of Administration. I think it's great dialogue, and I think we heard some of what we needed to know, but as of now, the scope for PDG is complete. So this was just going to be some conceptual planning. So I think the path that we're going to move forward with is, I would propose, I think we could probably move forward on a joint path of doing some stakeholder engagement to see how much it would cost to operate and maintain this facility, but then also moving to design phase. So I don't know if you all would like us to start working with PDG on the full-blown design, or if you would like us to at first just gather some information about the operations and maintenance costs of this before we move on to design. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the scope is over for PDG. If you'd like us to continue on design, we will need to start negotiating with PDG.
So
on the
I'll
full-
give you my feedback is, we need these fields as soon as possible. I mean, we need to go and meet with people and find out what the people's appetite is for us to do this. And we need to find out how we get the money to do it. And then we need to figure out how much David and whoever else is going to use these fields is willing to pay to use them. And we need to build a model so that we can make decisions, because I just speak for me. I want fields next year.
So I think, my opinion, I think it can work this way, where if we do move forward with design, community connections is really important to us all, no doubt.
You bet.
Right.
Need to meet with the neighbors as soon as possible. And probably gather, it may be 2, but gather their concerns in an organized manner. And then during design, as design comes, at some point, there'll be a time to have another meeting and be able to give some answers.
You bet.
To that, whether it's after the traffic study or whether it's 30 or 60% design,
Yeah.
okay, we're ready to show you some of these things. And then I have no doubt, if I were looking for something to invest in, we've seen complexes at Broken Arrow, we know how they work. We have the same needs that they had when they did it, same teams, same sports. So we know, we've got good information and data that this does work, about wherever it is. And so I'm optimistic enough about that to keep moving forward. I do think that's a component of it, to be prudent in this project, and also so they can start their planning of when, of their future seasons and things like that. And so I'm for moving forward, but doing those things at the same time, and I think we would, and I think we can.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, these guys are signing up kids early, and they don't know what options they're gonna have or fields they're gonna have to play on, so.
And parents are asking, 1,000 parents are asking,
And they
they're
email
asking
us.
us too. Yeah, in multiple sports.
So we have a lot of moving parts, but bottom line, there's a consensus, yes, we want the fields as much as possible, but we also got to be able to understand what are the other elements in there, how much stakeholders are going to pay, and how much the total life cycle of it is going to be.
Right.
Yeah.
So we can go forward and make a decision.
Well, and I think too, just hearing the concern for having open space, and this is one of the last open space areas in parks, and to our workshop earlier that was very interesting, talking about future needs. I mean, do we look at acquiring more land for park space so that we can have some open space? And I'm curious to know, because we do need this, and there is a huge demand. I also think it's a great revenue generator and all the things that have been said. I'm curious if the space that is left there, is that sufficient for Kite Fest? Is that sufficient for a large enough space for some of the activities that I think people want to continue to do? Or do we need to find some alternate open space? So I think we've got to move forward, but I don't want the public to feel like we're not hearing
Understood.
their concerns. And that we're not going to also try to address those and balance some needs.
And show that we're looking to the future for that too, for more
Absolutely.
open space.
Correct.
It's consistently been on our strategic plan to look east and plan and know Arcadia Lake, 22 acres of conservation. We
Absolutely.
do think about open space, and so need to communicate that as well, that it's not something we've forgotten about.
Absolutely. And that's actually a really good point. I mean, the 22 acres south of Hafer Park that the city purchased, that is for conservation and open. There will not be development there. So we are
And
thinking
we know
about
for
the balance.
something like Kite Fest is another conversation.
Yeah, yeah.
To have to. And then we've got the sculpture park at 60 acres at Second and Coltrane that's gonna have a big open
Absolutely.
field
Huge.
to it. And so I
There
think
may be
there's-
alternate sites for some of these activities.
All
if-
concerns are good.
Absolutely.
But the conversation is bigger too, with things that are going on.
Yeah, I just don't think we want to delay anything. We know the need is there. We've been told the
Understood.
need is there.
Understood.
And I agree with all these open spacings, and there's so many great places that we can look to.
Sure.
The Kite Fest is amazing. My grandchildren and myself, I love the Kite Fest. I don't want that to go away. And I don't think the city of Edmond, I don't think we'll let that go away. So if we need to find alternative places for it, if this is not enough open space, so be it, we will. But I just hate to see something else get delayed when we know the need is there.
Absolutely, okay. Thank
All
you for the
right,
clarity.
thank you.
I appreciate that.
Thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Great discussion. Thanks, everybody, for your comments.